This Gibson, the L-00 marked inside simply as style L-00 with the orange oval sticker, is based upon 1930s model, early 30s model. And when these Gibsons came on the scene, they were basically the cheapest offering from Gibson, really the cheapest guitar. Archtops would have been a more expensive production, and because they were cheap, relatively back then, it was still a Gibson, still had the Gibson name on it. Not everyone took great care of them. They were probably abused. So to find an L-00 vintage, I'm talking about, this is my only instrument really that isn't vintage. To find one vintage in great, superb condition is rare because most people abuse them. They got theirs and they didn't preserve it. So compared to a more expensive model, Gibson, you may see more of these because they produced more. It was a lower cost instrument, so there's more floating around the stratosphere, the universe. Eventually, more and more pop up. So this is based on the, but like I said, condition. Not many are in superb condition. But just because the fact that it was one of the cheaper models doesn't make it any less of a guitar, because it has certain things going for it. For one, it has a good design from the start. It's not fancy, but it has a good design. It's very playable, and it uses good materials. So you may have seen L-00, some of them may even have maple sides. The typical L-00 is going to have the Sitka top, the mahogany neck and back and sides with the rosewood fretboard and bridge. Real nice on this one. It's got modern features like the truss rod. It's got, this one has no cracks to it or anything. This is a new instrument, but it did come up from the factory with a bridge lift that I'm going to have to address, because these instruments were, say you had a vintage example of this exact, it's not an exact replica, but it's inspired by it at the very least. Say you had a vintage one like this, 1933 for example. It's going to be lightly braced. The guitar itself is going to be lightly constructed. So guitars that are lightly constructed, like from that era, that good design, are going to be really subject to humidity like any guitar. But if you care about it, it's different. So this is the Gibson L-00, and just because it was an inexpensive model doesn't mean that it's not a very nice sounding guitar. And blues players might say this is the best model of all time, and you could make a case for it. This one won't be in pristine condition until I get, well, it'll never be in pristine. I just got rid of the Martin 018, which had better, let's just say it didn't have the quality control flaws of this one, such as the bridge lift, a couple nitpicks here and here, but I kept this one anyway. If I had to pick between the two, I kept this one anyway. So just because it's an inexpensive instrument, back in the day when it came out, now they go for a substantial amount. Because at the time it was Gibson's lowest offering, going from say 1929 to early 1940s, it was still built upon a very solid design using great materials. You You would have had the Brazilian rosewood fretboard and bridge, the mahogany neck, back, and side, your Sitka top. But the black incarnation of this guitar is fairly rare to see a vintage version compared to the Sunburst. So the early ones were black, like this one. I kind of prefer this one. And I like Sunburst guitars. I own several Sunburst guitars, but the early ones were black. Later ones had the Sunburst. The early ones also had a white pickguard. Notice this is kind of your nitrocellulose tortoiseshell pickguard, not the white one. Those Murphy Labs have the white one with the artificial wear. But I didn't want one of those artificial wear guitars. First of all, I'm not completely sold on artificial aging at all, or especially artificial play wear, but really the artificial aging, I don't think it torrefied wood really compares to aged wood. But that's a completely different subject. So the earlier ones were black, then eventually you saw Sunburst. Here, this one's kind of unique. It has the nitrocellulose tortoiseshell pickguard, and some of the early vintage models you may only see binding on the front. So basically the front edge of the instrument. This one has front and back binding, which is cool. And so, make no mistake about it, just because it was the lowest tier model back then, it's still a fantastic sounding guitar, and it was an available one for students, hillbilly groups, blues players. It was accessible. It was a Gibson, and who was it designed for? That rockabilly playing. Some blues players think it is the best model, period. Now, I would probably make an argument for the LG2 3/4, but just make no mistake that it's a really nice sounding guitar. It's, can I put it? It's just a good guitar based upon a good design with good materials. Yeah, it's a good one. Good neck to it. So anyway, I just wanted to make this little video about the Gibson L-00, based on 1933. We picked this shape because it's probably the most aesthetically pleasing shape, but there are one or two other incarnations of the L-00 out there where they kind of messed around with the shape a little bit. But that was Gibson. They were experimenting, and I think they just said, okay, why did we change it? Let's go back to the shape that makes the most sense, which would probably be this one. And the L-00 is a good guitar. It is good. An important one to have in your collection. So this is the Gibson style L-00. Hereby guaranteed against the faulty craftsmanship and materials, which I'm not so sure the 1933 vintage version would have had a bridge lift like that, or a ding up here, or a little mark right. It's getting warm. Yeah, that doesn't really show up, does it? It's a little annoying mark right here. Right here. Where the finish is just pretty much missing. But just the standard L-00, this is the original. The standard L-00 has always been highly regarded as one of the best blues guitars of all time, so that's just something to think about, it really is. Because what it is it's a good playing, good sounding, well-designed, well-built instrument, and lightly built. I used to think this one kind of had some heft to it. No, it's lightly built. And the vintage version, believe me, they would be featherweight. But just like any guitar that's really light, what do I mean lightly built? Lightly braced. So any guitar like that is going to be very subject to humidity changes. It needs to be in a controlled environment and so forth. And that's the other side. If you were to drop a guitar like this, it would take a beating compared to that Guild that I got rid of. That it's just built way more sturdy. Much more sturdy build, heavier bracing. A lot of things like that happened in the 70s because of things like warranty, repairs, thicker strings. So when something's lightly built like this, or even more so extreme with a vintage version of this, like the LG 2¾ is a featherweight, those are more prone to things like cracks and all kind of things like that. So it's a balance, and they call this the perfect balance. But yeah, Gibson L-00. This happens to be the original one. Here, take a look here. Done several videos on this one, so I must like it. This one has the pickup system installed. Well, if I think of more, I'll make a part 2, but yeah, if you were to get the original one like this instead of the standard, I think your options are the ebony and the sunburst. Just know that historically the black guitars came first, and they were black for a period of time, and then later on they became sunburst. Now the black guitars, the vintage ones, probably more sought after for their rarity and probably just aesthetically their looks. And I would have to agree, it's not a fancy guitar, but it is a very cool looking guitar, and it is a very good guitar, plain and simple. Good design, good materials. They generally had good workmanship. I'm kind of speaking vintage now. Things were more handmade. But at least this is based upon that design. And I think it sounds really good. Not bad. Bluesy thing. too sweaty now. Not too sweaty. So, I mean, this modern incarnation of the L-00 it's still pretty light. Still pretty lightweight. You can see the lower bout is significantly wider than the upper bout. Really classy looking. Not an exact replica of a 33 or anything like that. Not the exact neck, not the exact materials. As close really as you can get with a modern take on it. I definitely take this over the standard. I take this one with the vintage vibe, and I take it over the Murphy Lab. The Murphy Lab Gibsons. Because what I see with a lot of these artificially reliced instruments and so forth is the playware on a lot of them. It doesn't even really match up with any kind of pattern that someone would really create through playing. And me, I overanalyze things, and I'd be looking at something looking like someone just went over it with a piece of paper, sandpaper or something. I'd be overanalyzing it. And if you think about this model might have went for, I don't know, back when it was first introduced, might have went for $25 or something. That's why there was more of them produced. Because when you start getting into really high price instruments, say you wanted to buy something today that costs $30,000 or something like that, $27,000. Whoever produces that would be lucky to sell a handful of them. But these, at their time, were value packed. Now look at them. $25 instruments. Now it would be a good deal to get one for $7,000. It's ridiculous. And I don't care what you want to say about inflation or whatever else. The more expensive something is, unless it's a big commercial success, the less there's going to be of it. So if there was something that really didn't catch on, I was thinking about this with the Martin Jumbo. They made the specific J21. That's just a rare guitar. They only made a little over 200 or so. It's a really, really good guitar. Say there's something they only made a handful of them, and you're calling that rare. It might be rare in the sense of it's just so expensive that the average person is just going to back away from it. There's a certain breaking point. Where with this, when they first came out, it was Gibson's cheapest guitar, but it was still a really good, solid guitar. With good materials, a fantastic design, to the point where it's regarded as one of the best blues models of all time. And that's why people, they got them, but the ones you see turning up today that are from that era, they look crazy because each one has their own personality, first of all, but the way people treated them is not the way they're going to be treated, or the way they would have treated something that might have cost 5, 10, 15 times as much money. But the fact that this, at its time it was still a Gibson, but it was sitting at the bottom. A lot of musicians had access to them. So that's why the ones you see pop up on Reverb today will have 3 or 4 vertical cracks, a huge amount of wear here. So to find one in remarkable condition, that is fairly rare. So, these original guitars, Gibson original series, this was a good one. It's a really good sounding guitar. I'll play without the thumb pick. Or just the fingers. Running low on space here, but it's good sounding. Good play, may even be great sounding. Easy playing. And with great materials. I gotta put some new strings on this, but I'm not gonna do anything until I get the bridge looked at. I'm not prepared to get any repairs done soon. I'm just getting all my stuff together. And I'm supposed to be getting that trade-in instrument on Thursday. So that should be interesting as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this little tidbit into one of my favorite guitar models here. Might like to change out the bridge pins someday. The ones that came with it. All original, Thanks again.